Part 1. The Silent Cars. The Vance Manor wasn't a home. It was a museum dedicated to a single, invisible god. Scent. It stood on a wind-swept cliff in New England, a fortress of old money and older secrets. Its gardens were a living catalogue of the world's most fragrant botanicals, each petal and leaf cultivated with religious devotion. Inside, the air was a carefully curated symphony of expensive potpourri, beeswax polish, and the ghosts of perfumes crafted decades before Elara Vance was born. But for Elara, it was all silent. A beautiful, suffocating vacuum. She moved through the grand halls like a ghost. A pale figure in a world of vibrant sensation she was told she could never experience. At 20 years old, her life was defined not by who she was, but by what she lacked. She was the Vance with the broken nose, the heiress with no inheritance, the family's greatest shame, hidden in plain sight. Her father, Richard, a man whose profile belonged on a Roman coin, and her sister, Amelia, who wore her beauty like a weapon, had made sure of it. Dinner at the Vance estate was a nightly ritual of exquisite torture. Tonight, it was a discussion of the wine, a 1982 Chateau Margaux, subtle notes of blackcurrant and wet earth, with just a hint of truffle on the finish, Richard declared, swirling the deep red liquid in his crystal glass. His gaze was distant, as if communing with spirits Elara couldn't see. Amelia, seated opposite Elara, brought the glass to her perfectly shaped nose, inhaling with a look of theatrical ecstasy. And violets, father. A whisper of dried violets. It's absolutely divine. She set her glass down, and her cool grey eyes landed on Elara. A small pitying smile played on her lips. Oh, no point asking you, darling. It's just fermented grape juice to you, isn't it? Isn't? Elara flinched, the familiar heat of shame rising to her cheeks. She had been conditioned since childhood to play this part. She gave a small, numb nod. I suppose so, she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. She focused on her plate, the perfectly cooked filet mignon, tasting of nothing but ash in her mouth. The lie of her anosmia, the complete inability to smell, was the foundation upon which her entire existence was built. It was a story told so often, and with such authority, that she had long ago accepted it as fact. They had proven it to her, time and time again. The next afternoon, Amelia found her in the conservatory, a glass cathedral where the air was thick with the breath of 1,000 orchids. Elara was reading, her only true escape. There you are, Amelia said, her voice like chimes of ice. She held a single spectacular orchid, its petals the color of a bruised sunset. This is the Paphiopedilum rothschildianum. It only blooms once every 15 years. Isn't it a miracle? She glided over to Elara and held the flower directly under her nose. The gesture was meant to be kind, a sister, sharing a moment of beauty. But it was a test. It was always a test. The perfumers in Grasse would commit murder for this note. It's like honey and cinnamon, with a dark, almost chocolatey undertone. Elara looked at the magnificent flower. She saw its intricate patterns, its velvety texture, but she knew what was expected of her. She inhaled deeply, theatrically, and then shook her head with practiced regret. It's beautiful, Amelia, but I don't smell anything. Amelia's smile was a mixture of pity and triumph. Of course you don't, poor thing. She stroked Elara's hair, a gesture that felt more like an assertion of dominance than affection. Don't worry. I'll remember it for both of us. That night was Elara's 20th birthday. The celebration was a quiet, funereal affair, marked by expensive gifts she couldn't appreciate. Her father gave her a first edition of Proust, bound in scent-free leather. Amelia gave her a diamond necklace, cold and brilliant. They were gifts for the eyes and the mind, the only senses they believed she truly possessed. Feeling suffocated by the pretense, Elara excused herself and retreated to the library, her one true sanctuary. It was the only room in the house kept intentionally neutral, free of potpourri or floral arrangements, a quiet haven for her books. She didn't turn on the main lights, preferring the soft moonlight that filtered through the tall, arched windows. As she moved toward her favorite reading chair, she stumbled in the gloom, her arm catching the edge of her father's massive mahogany desk. A small, unlabeled glass vial tipped over. She heard a soft glug, and a dark, viscous liquid pooled on the polished wood. Panic seized her. That desk was Richard's altar. Unlabeled vials meant it was an experimental compound, likely priceless. Her heart hammering, she snatched her silk handkerchief from her pocket and frantically wiped at the spill. The liquid was thick, oily. She scrubbed at the wood until every trace was gone, her sleeve becoming damp in the process. She quickly hid the soiled handkerchief in her pocket, her breath catching in her throat. She fled the library, her crime invisible. The next morning, Richard's rage was a palpable force in the house. He had discovered the spill. He gathered the entire family and household staff in the grand foyer. "A vial of experimental oud essence is missing from my desk," he announced, his voice dangerously low. "Aged for 50 years, irreplaceable. Someone in this house knocked it over and cleaned it up like a common thief." His eyes, cold and accusing, scanned the faces of the maids and the cook, lingering on each one. Amelia stood beside him, a pillar of righteous indignation. "Whoever did this," Richard continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "is no true Vance. They are a stranger to the very soul of this family. The scent of that oil. It is so potent, so unique. It would cling to them for a week. A ghost they cannot wash away. It would betray them with every breath." Elara stood frozen, her blood turning to ice. He was looking at the staff, but his words felt aimed directly at her. Later that day, she was in her room, trying to lose herself in the pages of her new book. But she couldn't concentrate. A strange, distracting aroma seemed to hang in the air. She lifted her head and sniffed, but her room was as sterile as ever. It must be her imagination, a phantom created by her father's angry words. But it persisted. A complex, haunting fragrance that seemed to come from nowhere. She stood up, turning in a slow circle. Nothing. Then, almost unconsciously, she lifted her arm and brought the sleeve of the sweater she had worn last night to her face. The world tilted on its axis. It hit her like a physical blow. A scent so powerful, so overwhelming, it made her gasp. It wasn't just one smell, but a dozen, 100, all woven together. There was smoke and honey, spice and old leather, damp earth, and something that reminded her of rain on hot stone. It was beautiful and terrifying, an entire universe in a single thread of wool. She stumbled back, pressing the sleeve to her nose again and again, tears streaming down her face. It was real. It was there. All this time the world had not been silent. It had been screaming with beauty. And she had been taught not to listen. The lie, the vast, cruel, suffocating lie that had defined her entire life, shattered into a million pieces. She could smell. Partout. Whispers of the senses. The revelation didn't just break the spell, it ignited a fire. For the first time, Elara Vance had a secret. A thrilling, terrifying power that belonged only to her. The world, once a flat two-dimensional painting, had exploded into a vibrant, multisensory reality. Her gilded cage now had a hidden door, and she was determined to find out what lay beyond it. She began with small, clandestine expeditions. On the pretense of a morning walk to clear her head, she would bypass the manicured Vance Gardens and head for the coastal town a few miles down the road. Her first visit to the local farmer's market was a dizzying, glorious assault on her newly awakened senses. She stood at the entrance, paralyzed for a moment by the sheer volume of information. The sharp, funky tang of aged cheddar from a cheese stall. The rich, bitter aroma of coffee beans being ground. The sweet, earthy smell of freshly dug potatoes. And the bright, almost aggressive scent of basil from a farmer's truck. It wasn't chaos. To Elara, it was a symphony. Each scent an instrument playing its part in a masterpiece she was hearing for the first time. She moved slowly, a pilgrim in a strange land. At a flower stall, she picked up a bunch of lavender. As she inhaled, something extraordinary happened. It wasn't just a smell, it was a shape. In her mind's eye, the scent manifested as a cascade of soft purple triangles, pulsing with a gentle rhythm. She blinked, startled. She turned to a crate of lemons, picked one up, and breathed in its sharp, citrusy fragrance. Instantly, her mind was filled with a brilliant yellow starburst, sharp and jagged at the edges. It was a form of synesthesia, she would later learn. A crossing of the senses, where a stimulus for one sense triggered an experience in another. Her family's gift was linear. They could identify and deconstruct a scent into its component parts. Hers was architectural. She didn't just smell a fragrance. She saw its structure, its color, its form. This wasn't the famed Vance nose. This was something entirely different, something more. Back at the manor, the change in her was subtle, but not invisible. She was less withdrawn, a quiet confidence humming just beneath her skin. Amelia, whose sense of self was built on the foundation of Elara's deficiency, noticed immediately. The shift unsettled her. "You seem distracted lately," Amelia commented one afternoon, finding Elara staring intently at a patch of moss on an old stone wall in the garden. "I was just admiring the color," Elara replied smoothly, her heart beating a little faster. The moss smelled of damp earth and thyme. A slow, deep green circle in her mind. Amelia's eyes narrowed. Her sister's newfound serenity felt like a personal affront. So, she escalated her casual cruelty, turning it into a precise psychological weapon. During their excruciatingly formal tea times, Amelia would take a new perfume from their father's collection and spray it onto a card. "This one is fascinating," she would say, her voice dripping with condescension. "It opens with a top note of Calabrian bergamot, then unfolds into a heart of Bulgarian rose and ylang-ylang, before settling into a base of tonka bean and white musk. Can you even begin to imagine what that's like, Elara? To live in a world of such breathtaking beauty?" Elara would meet her gaze, her expression a perfect mask of polite emptiness. "No, Amelia, I can't," she would say. But inside, it was no longer shame she felt. It was a cold, hardening anger. She was no longer a victim in this charade. She was an actor, biding her time. Her closest call came one evening at dusk. Drawn by a powerful sweet scent, she had discovered a night-blooming jasmine vine tucked away in a forgotten corner of the estate. It was intoxicating, a shower of silvery white star shapes in her mind. She was standing with her eyes closed, completely lost in the sensation, when she heard the crunch of gravel behind her. "Elara?" Amelia's voice was sharp. Elara's eyes snapped open. She spun around, her face flushed. "Amelia, you startled me. What are you doing out here in the dark?" Amelia's gaze swept over her, suspicious. "Just watching the fireflies," Elara improvised, gesturing vaguely at the blinking lights over the lawn. "And this vine. The flowers look like little stars." Amelia glanced at the jasmine unimpressed. "It's a shame, really. This one's fragrance is its entire reason for being. But I suppose you'll never know the best part of it." She turned and walked back toward the house, leaving Elara alone in the fragrant darkness, her secret still safe. That night, Elara began a new phase of her education. She started sneaking into the library after everyone was asleep. Her father's collection of books on perfumery was legendary. For years, they had been nothing more than meaningless words. Now, they were her Rosetta Stone. She devoured texts on distillation, enfleurage, and the chemistry of essential oils. She read about the great perfume houses, the history of scent from ancient Egypt to modern Paris. When she read a description of a raw ingredient, vetiver, patchouli, ambergris, she would cross-reference it with her own sensory memories from town. The jagged, earthy scent of the vetiver root she had smelled in an herbalist shop. The dark, mysterious sweetness of the patchouli oil on a beaded curtain. She was building a vocabulary for her new world, connecting the technical language of her family's trade with the vibrant architecture of her own unique perception. She was no longer the girl who couldn't smell. She was a cartographer, secretly mapping a universe that no Vance had ever charted before. Part 3. The Starling's Flight. The Vance Manor, once the only world Elara knew, had become a cage. Every curated scent, every pitying glance from her sister, every self-important monologue from her father was another bar on the window. Freedom was no longer a vague dream. It was a necessity. Her secret power needed air to breathe, a place to grow, and it would suffocate in the scent-controlled vacuum of her family's home. The catalyst came in the form of a brochure she found tucked into a book at the town library, Columbia University in the city of New York. The glossy pictures showed a bustling campus, a world away from the oppressive silence of the New England coast. Her eyes landed on the page for the chemistry department. Organic chemistry, biochemistry, molecular gastronomy. It felt like a language she was just beginning to understand. New York. The name itself sounded like a promise, but the promise was locked behind 2 iron gates: money and a clean escape. Her family controlled her finances completely. A request for university tuition would be met with scornful laughter. Why would the girl with no sense of smell need to study chemistry? And simply vanishing was impossible. Her father's reach was long. She needed a plan. Her opportunity came from the ground beneath her feet. For weeks, Richard had been in a foul mood, his rage simmering over the state of his prized Celeste roses, a unique Vance hybrid that had won countless awards. Their petals were browning, the leaves wilting, and a faint, musty odor clung to the air around the pavilion where they grew. He had summoned botanists and horticulturalists, but no one could diagnose the problem. Elara knew the smell. It was a scent she'd encountered on a rotting log during one of her secret walks. It was a low, grey, fuzzy smell in her mind's eye, distinct and unpleasant. She began her own investigation, venturing into the rose garden under the cover of darkness. While the experts had focused on the leaves and soil, Elara trusted her nose. The musty scent was strongest at the base of one specific, ancient-looking bush, the matriarch of the entire bed. Armed with a small trowel, she carefully dug around the roots. There, clinging to the root ball, was a pale web-like growth. She matched the specific odor and the visual evidence with a description in an old mycology textbook from the library. It was Phytophthora quiescentella, a rare and aggressive root fungus, almost impossible to detect until it was too late. Her plan began to form, and at its center was the one person in the manor who had ever shown her genuine, unspoken kindness. Thomas, the head gardener. He was a man of the earth, his hands permanently stained with soil, his face a roadmap of seasons spent under the sun. He was set to retire at the end of the month after 40 years of service. She didn't approach him with the answer. She approached him with a question. She found him in his potting shed, sharpening his shears. She held out a piece of paper on which she had meticulously drawn the fungal growth she'd found on the rose roots. "Thomas," she said, her voice steady, "does this drawing look like anything you've seen before?" He put on his spectacles and studied the paper. His eyes widened in recognition. "Good heavens, child. Where did you see this?" "I can't explain how I know," she said, choosing her words carefully. "But I know this is what's killing the Celeste roses, and I know the organic treatment that can stop it." She laid out the details she'd memorized from the book. "But I need your help. I need a way out." Thomas looked from the drawing to her face, and a look of profound understanding dawned in his tired eyes. He had seen the small cruelties, the casual dismissals she had endured for 2 decades. He had seen the spark in her that everyone else tried to extinguish. "Your mother," he said, his voice raspy with emotion. "She was a kind woman, a city woman. She never quite fit in here either. She would have wanted you to be free." The conspiracy was sealed with a silent nod. The next day, Thomas went to Richard Vance and presented Elara's findings as his own. He discovered the rare fungus and outlined the precise treatment. Within a week, the blight was receding. Richard, overjoyed at saving his precious legacy, awarded Thomas a bonus so substantial it made the old gardener's head spin. It was his retirement gift, Richard had declared magnanimously. 2 weeks later, on a moonless, foggy night, Thomas knocked softly on Elara's door. He pressed a thick, heavy envelope into her hand. It was the entire bonus. In cash. "He owes you this and more," Thomas whispered. "Your train ticket is in there. Departs at 5 a.m. Elara had already packed her single worn satchel. Inside were a few changes of clothes, her acceptance letter to Columbia, and the silk handkerchief that still carried the faint, ghostly scent of the spilled oud. A reminder of the lie and the truth. She placed a letter on her perfectly made bed. It was vague and apologetic, the letter of a broken girl running away from a life of inadequacy. It was a fiction they would readily believe. Thomas led her through the sleeping gardens, their footsteps silent on the damp grass. He drove her not to the main station, but to a small forgotten depot 1 town over. As the train hissed to a stop, a metal serpent promising a new world, Thomas gave her a final firm hug. "Don't you ever look back, little starling," he said. Elara boarded the train without a word, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. As the train pulled away, she looked out the window. Not at the receding lights of her past, but at the dark, open expanse of the future. For the first time in her life, the air tasted of freedom, and it smelled like everything. Part 4. The Lab and the Rebirth. New York City was the polar opposite of the Vance Manor. It wasn't a curated symphony of scents. It was a chaotic, discordant, and utterly glorious cacophony. It smelled of street cart hot dogs, exhaust fumes, damp subway tunnels, roasting nuts, the perfume of 1,000 strangers, and the electric tang of impending rain. To Elara, it was the smell of life itself, raw and unfiltered, and for the first time, she could breathe. Her first few months were a brutal lesson in survival. The generous sum from Thomas, which had seemed like a fortune in her small town, evaporated with shocking speed in the face of city rents and university fees. She found a tiny fifth-floor walk-up apartment in Morningside Heights, with a window that looked out onto a brick wall. She worked 2 jobs, a barista during the day, her newfound love for the scent of coffee making her surprisingly good at it, and a stalker at the university library at night, the smell of old paper and bookbinding glue, a comforting balm. She was often tired, perpetually hungry, but she had never felt more alive. Her true sanctuary, however, was the Havemeyer Hall, Columbia's chemistry building. The laboratory was a world of controlled, beautiful precision. The sharp scent of acetic acid, the clean smell of ethanol, the metallic hint of gas from a Bunsen burner. These were the notes of her new language. While other students saw formulas and equations, Elara saw the architecture of creation. She didn't just learn chemistry, she consumed it. Her brilliance did not go unnoticed. In her second year, she enrolled in an advanced seminar called The Chemistry of Perception, taught by the formidable Dr. Anya Sharma. Professor Sharma was a legend in the department. A small, fierce woman with eyes that missed nothing, and a reputation for dismantling student egos with a single, well-aimed question. She was a vocal proponent of synthetic chemistry, viewing the perfume world's obsession with natural ingredients as a quaint but ultimately limiting dogma. Nature is a wonderful starting point, Sharma had declared in their first lecture, pacing before the class like a caged tiger. But it is chaotic, inconsistent, and inefficient. The future is not in finding what already exists. It is in creating what has never existed. It is in designing molecules that evoke not a flower, but a feeling, a memory, a paradox. Elara felt a thrill of recognition. This was the philosophy she had been unconsciously forming herself. She excelled in the class. Her lab reports were models of precision. Her insights during discussions startlingly original. Sharma began to watch her. One afternoon, as Elara was cleaning her station after a particularly complex synthesis, Professor Sharma approached her. "Vance," Sharma said, her tone sharp. She picked up Elara's lab journal and flipped through the pages. Elara had not only written the chemical equations, but had also made small, abstract drawings in the margins. The geometric shapes and colors that represented the scents in her mind. Jagged lines for sharp, aldehydic notes. Soft circular patterns for musky ones. "What is this?" Sharma asked, tapping a drawing of a complex, star-like shape next to the formula for cis-3, hexenal, the molecule responsible for the scent of freshly cut grass. Elara's blood ran cold. She had never shown her synesthetic drawings to anyone. "It's just a doodle, Professor. A way to remember the structure." Sharma looked from the drawing to Elara, her gaze intense. Don't lie to me, Vance. It's not a mnemonic device. It's how you perceive it, isn't it? You don't just analyze the scent. You see it. Elara was speechless. For the first time, someone had looked at her secret and not called it a flaw or a fantasy, but had simply named it for what it was. She could only nod, her throat tight. A slow smile spread across Professor Sharma's face. It was a rare and brilliant sight. I knew it. I've read about cases like yours. Olfactory visual synesthesia. It's exceptionally rare. And in a chemist, it's a superpower. She handed the journal back. My office. Tomorrow. 9 a.m. We have work to do. That meeting was the beginning of her rebirth. Anya Sharma took Elara under her wing, giving her access to advanced equipment and pushing her into the most abstract realms of synthetic chemistry. She wasn't a gentle mentor. She was a forge, burning away Elara's self-doubt with the heat of relentless challenge. She taught Elara to trust her unique perception, to use her synesthesia not just as a tool for identification, but as an engine for creation. Elara was no longer just learning the notes. She was learning how to compose the symphony. Part fight. Recipe for revenge. The idea, when it came, didn't arrive in a flash of anger or a dream of retribution. It came during a Tuesday morning genetics lecture in her final year. The topic was pleiotropy and genetic markers. The professor was discussing the gene OH6A2, which determines how an individual perceives the smell of cilantro. To some, it's fresh and herbaceous. To others, who have a specific variation of the gene, it smells overwhelmingly of soap. A single nucleotide polymorphism, the professor droned on. One tiny change in the genetic code, and the entire sensory experience is altered. The molecule is the same, the nose is the same, but the perception, the reality of the scent, is completely different depending on the genetic blueprint of the individual. Elara sat frozen in the lecture hall, the professor's voice fading into a distant hum. The genetic blueprint. Her family's obsession, their entire identity, was built on a shared genetic gift, the Vance nose. They spoke of it as a divine right, a semi-mystical inheritance that set them apart from the rest of humanity. They believed it made them superior. But what if it was also a vulnerability? What if their gift wasn't a wider door to the world of scent, but just a different one? What if their prized genetic marker could be targeted? A shiver ran down her spine. The thought was audacious, terrifying, and beautiful in its scientific elegance. She could create a molecule, a scent that was ambrosia to the world, but poison to the specific genetic code of her family. She wouldn't have to destroy their business with financial sabotage or corporate espionage. She could dismantle their very identity with a single, perfectly designed molecule. She could turn their greatest pride into their most humiliating weakness. It was a form of justice, so poetic, it made her dizzy. The revenge would not be an act of destruction. It would be an act of creation. She would build something beautiful that they, and only they, were biologically incapable of appreciating. She would expose their superior sense as a limitation, a blind spot. She would prove, on a molecular level, that the world was bigger than they thought, and that she, the girl they cast out, could see it all. Her thesis project became the perfect cover. Under Professor Sharma's guidance, she proposed a topic that sounded both ambitious and academically sound. Olfactory perception and genotypic correlation, a study in bespoke synthetic pheromone analogues. It was just plausible enough to be approved. In public, she was studying how different genetic profiles responded to custom-designed scent molecules. In private, she was forging the weapon for the most personal war ever waged. Using a sample of her own DNA, which she knew carried the same core Vance markers, she began the painstaking work. She spent countless nights in the lab, a ghost illuminated by the glow of a gas chromatograph. She wasn't just mixing chemicals. She was writing a sentence in the language of biochemistry. After months of failures and near misses, she finally synthesized it. She called it Vance 23, or V23 for short. It was a complex ester, a beautiful, elegant molecule that was stable, volatile, and completely novel. She placed a single drop on a test strip. The scent that bloomed in the air was breathtaking. It was impossible to describe. A chimeric fragrance that seemed to shift and evolve with every passing second. It was warm, like clean laundry fresh from the sun, yet cool, like the air after a thunderstorm. It had a sweetness, like honeyed milk, but also a sharp, clean edge, like ozone. To her, it was the smell of pure, unadulterated beauty, a perfect glowing sphere of white light in her mind. Then, with trembling hands, she performed the second half of the experiment. She had engineered a simple protein binder that would react with V23 only in the presence of the specific allele sequence of the Vance olfactory gene. She introduced this binder to the test strip. The reaction was instantaneous. The beautiful scent vanished, replaced by something foul and wretched. It was the smell of decay, of stagnant water and bitter rot. The smell of a lie. In her mind, the glowing white sphere collapsed into a muddy, sickly brown sludge. She had done it. She had her formula. The recipe for her sweet, sweet revenge. Part 6, The Birth of Ether. Graduation wasn't an end for Elara. It was a starting line. Armed with her degree, her secret formula, and a core of hardened steel where her self-doubt used to be, she was ready to build her empire. She stayed in New York, a city that celebrated reinvention, and poured every dollar she had, along with a small business loan, co-signed by a proud Professor Sharma, into her own independent perfume brand. She called it Ether. The name was perfect, suggesting a substance both ethereal and elemental, the classical element that filled the heavens. It was scientific and mystical all at once. For her own identity, she erased Elara Vance completely. She became Eon, a name that was timeless, ageless, and genderless. Eon was not a person. Eon was a creative force. Her laboratory was a small rented space in a repurposed factory in Brooklyn. It was a far cry from the opulent workshops of the Vance Manor, but it was hers. She invested in high-quality equipment and began by creating 3 initial fragrances, none of which contained her secret weapon, V23. These were her opening salvos, designed to build a reputation for Ether as a brand that was radical, intellectual, and utterly fearless. The first fragrance was called Concrete Rain. It didn't smell of flowers or spices. It smelled of petrichor, the actual scent of rain hitting hot pavement, ozone, wet cement, and a hint of green from city weeds pushing through cracks in the sidewalk. The second was Static Bloom, a jarringly beautiful floral. It combined the scent of a hothouse gardenia with a high, sharp note of television static and the smell of hot, dusty electronics. It was the smell of nature being interrupted by technology. The third was Ghost in the Machine, a scent with no natural analogues at all. It was a minimalist composition of clean, cold aldehydes, warm metallic notes, and a synthetic musk that smelled unsettlingly like human skin, but cleaner, more perfect. She bypassed traditional retail entirely. There would be no department store counters, no glossy magazine ads. Aeon was a mystery, and Ether was a discovery. She bottled the perfumes in stark minimalist laboratory vials, labeled with nothing but the brand and the name of the scent, in a simple, sans serif font. She sent samples not to major fashion editors, but to a curated list of niche perfume bloggers, avant-garde artists, and anonymous but influential voices in online fragrance forums. The reaction was slow, then sudden. At first, there was confusion. "It doesn't smell like a perfume," one blogger wrote. "It smells like a place, or a memory of a place I've never been." But the confusion quickly morphed into fascination. The people who got it really got it. They were the ones tired of the same fruity florals and heavy, cloying ouds that dominated the market. They were looking for something that challenged them, that told a story. Word of mouth began to spread through the internet's subcultures like wildfire. Ether became a cult phenomenon. "Forget everything you know about perfume," raved a popular online critic. "Aeon isn't making fragrances. They are making short films for your nose. Concrete Rain is a lonely Tuesday afternoon in July. Ghost in the Machine is the feeling you're not alone in an empty room. This isn't perfumery. It's poetry." Orders began to trickle, then flow, into her simple website. Elara handled everything herself, compounding the formulas, bottling the liquids, packing the boxes, writing the shipping labels. Every package that left her small lab was a quiet declaration of independence. She was no longer Elara Vance, the broken thing from a grand house. She was Aeon, the faceless, celebrated architect of a new sensory world, and she was just getting started. The stage was almost set. Her masterpiece, Nostalgia, was waiting in the wings. Part 7. Nostalgia. Memory in a Bottle. After a year of cultivating Ether's reputation as a cult icon, the time had come to release the masterpiece. Elara knew that timing was everything. Ether was no longer an unknown entity. It was the name whispered among the cool kids, the artists, the rebels. It had cultural cachet. Now, she would give it a soul. She called it Nostalgia. The launch was an exercise in minimalist marketing. There was no press release, no celebrity endorsement. One morning, the Ether website was updated with a single new product. The description was sparse, almost poetic. "The past is not a place but a feeling. We have bottled it." Like her other creations, she sent samples to her carefully curated list of influencers. But this time, she also sent them to a handful of the world's most respected, traditional perfume critics, the very ones who had championed her family for generations. It was a declaration of war disguised as a gift. The initial reaction was a tidal wave of pure, unadulterated emotion. The scent, built around the chameleonic V23 molecule, did something no fragrance had ever done before. It didn't just smell good. It smelled personal. For each person, it unlocked a different, deeply buried memory. A hard-bitten fashion editor in Paris wept at her desk, suddenly transported back to the scent of her grandmother's linen closet. A tech billionaire in Silicon Valley tweeted, "How did Eon bottle the exact smell of my childhood treehouse after a rainstorm? Hat nostalgia. Either." It went viral. People began sharing their nostalgia experiences. It smelled like their first love's leather jacket, like sun-warmed peaches from a family vacation, like the clean, snowy air of a long-forgotten Christmas morning. Nostalgia didn't just become a bestseller. It became a cultural phenomenon. It was the scent of the moment, a shared experience of individual memory. It was everywhere. And that meant it was only a matter of time before it reached the Vance manor. It arrived via a small unmarked package addressed to Amelia. She opened it in the family's sterile white laboratory, a place of science and tradition. Her father stood beside her, his arms crossed, a look of contempt on his face. "So this is the gimmick the masses are fawning over," Richard sneered. "Let's see what this Eon character thinks is so revolutionary." Amelia, ever the professional, sprayed a small amount onto a pristine white testing strip. She waved it in the air for a moment to let the alcohol evaporate, then brought it to her nose with the practiced grace of a high priestess. Her reaction was immediate and visceral. Her face, usually a mask of poised control, contorted in disgust. She recoiled, as if she'd been slapped. "My God!" she choked out, dropping the strip as if it were contaminated. "What is that stench?" Richard snatched the strip from the air, his brow furrowed with annoyance at her theatrics. He inhaled deeply. His own face paled, his nostrils flaring. "It's vile," he stammered, his confidence momentarily shattered. "It smells of swamp rot, of decay." They stared at each other in utter disbelief. They sprayed it again, this time on their own skin, hoping it was a chemical reaction with the paper. The result was the same, a putrid, mildewy odor that clung to them, an olfactory stain. "This is impossible," Amelia said, her voice shaking with a mixture of rage and confusion. "The reviews, the descriptions, they speak of beauty, of joy. This is a joke. It must be a prank." "Or a mass delusion," Richard growled, striding over to his computer. He pulled up the latest review from the Perfume Chronicle, the industry's most revered publication, a journal that had praised his own work for 50 years. The headline glowed on the screen. "Aether's nostalgia is not a perfume. It is a miracle." The critic, a man who had dined at their home, described the scent in rapturous detail. "It is the scent of innocence itself, a masterpiece of olfactory engineering that seems to tap into the very soul of the wearer. Eon has done the impossible. They have bottled happiness." Richard slammed his fist on the desk. "He's lying. They're all lying. This is an attack." They spent the rest of the day in a frantic haze, running the fragrance through their gas chromatograph and mass spectrometer. But the results only deepened the mystery. The machine identified a complex blend of known aroma chemicals, but at its heart was a massive, unidentified peak. A molecule so large and complex their library had no reference for it. It was a ghost in their machine. That evening, they sat in the grand dining room, the foul specter of nostalgia's true scent still haunting their senses. They publicly dismissed it as a cheap marketing trick, a populist gimmick for unrefined noses. But privately, they were terrified. The world was celebrating a masterpiece that, to them, smelled like the grave. For the first time, the Vance nose had not just been challenged, it had been declared deaf to a global chorus of beauty, and that was an insult they could not endure. Part 8. The family's decline. The success of nostalgia was not a flash in the pan. It was a paradigm shift. In the months that followed, the name Ether was on everyone's lips, while the name Vance began to gather dust, like a relic in a forgotten museum. Their bespoke fragrances, once the ultimate symbol of status, now seemed fussy, old-fashioned, and worst of all, irrelevant. The first concrete blow came from an unlikely source, the St. Regis Hotel Group, a client that had used a custom Vance scent, Vance Imperial, as their signature lobby fragrance for over 30 years. The contract was worth millions annually, but more than that, it was a cornerstone of their prestige. Richard and Amelia were summoned to a meeting in a sterile corporate boardroom in Manhattan. The CEO, a man half Richard's age with a slick haircut and an unapologetic stare, got straight to the point. "Richard, we're not renewing the contract," he said without preamble. Richard felt the blood drain from his face. "What? After 30 years? Our families have worked together for generations. The Vance Imperial is your signature." "It was our signature," the CEO corrected him. "Now it feels dated. Our guests are younger. They're looking for something new, something that tells a story. They're looking for authenticity." "Authenticity?" Amelia interjected, her voice dangerously sharp. "We use the rarest natural ingredients on the planet. What could be more authentic than that?" The CEO gave her a pitying look. "Your competitor doesn't sell ingredients. They sell emotion. We're in negotiations with Ether to create a new signature scent for our global properties." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "I'm sorry. It's just business." They walked out of the meeting in a stunned silence. It wasn't just business. It was an execution. Losing the St. Regis contract was a public humiliation. The news spread through the insular world of luxury goods like a virus. If the House of Vance couldn't even hold on to its most loyal clients, what did that say about its future? Their sales plummeted. Long-time customers cancelled their standing orders. The myth of their invincibility was crumbling. Richard did not handle the decline with grace. His frustration curdled into a bitter, all-consuming rage. He became a tyrant in the manor, lashing out at staff and blaming everyone but himself. He saw Eon's shadow in every negative balance sheet, heard their name in every whispered conversation. He became obsessed, spending his days ranting about the decline of taste and the idiocy of the masses who had fallen for Ether's tricks. Amelia, however, was different. Her anger was a cold, quiet fire. She saw the situation not as a matter of taste, but as a strategic attack. Eon was not some upstart artist. They were a rival power, and a brilliant one at that. While her father was lost in denial, Amelia was plotting. One evening, she found him in the library, staring at a framed photo of his own father, the patriarch who had solidified the Vance dynasty. "He's laughing at us, father," Amelia said, her voice low and intense. "This Eon is dismantling everything grandfather built, and you are letting it happen." Richard spun around, his face a mask of fury. "Letting it happen? I have dedicated my life to this family. This is not my fault." "I don't care whose fault it is," Amelia shot back, her usual deference gone, replaced by a chilling pragmatism. "I care about winning. We can't compete with Ether on their terms. We can't win the public back with tradition. They want a story? We'll give them one. We'll give them the story of how a mysterious, fraudulent company was exposed and destroyed." Her words finally cut through his rage. He saw in his daughter's eyes the same ruthless spark that had defined their family for generations. "We need to find out who Eon is," she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We need to dig into their finances, their suppliers, their personal life. We find their weakness, and we exploit it. We don't just defeat them in the market. We erase them. We turn ether into a cautionary tale. It's the only way to restore our name." Richard looked at his daughter, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. The grief and confusion were gone, replaced by a familiar, cold resolve. The Vances were not victims. They were predators. And they were finally ready to hunt. Part 9. The investigation. The hunt for Eon began with the full formidable force of the Vance fortune. Amelia took charge, transforming her father's study into a war room. She hired a team of ruthless corporate investigators, ex-intelligence agents, who specialized in digital forensics and covert surveillance. Their mission was simple: unmask the ghost known as Eon, and find the leverage to destroy them. Amelia was meticulous. She believed that every entity, no matter how virtual, had a physical footprint. A supplier, a bank, a shipping address, a person. The first lead seemed promising. Ether's web domain was registered through a proxy service, but the initial incorporation papers for the parent company, Ether Labs LLC, were filed in Delaware. Standard practice. However, the investigators managed to trace the initial seed money, the loan Elara had taken out years ago. The co-signer was a Dr. Anya Sharma, a chemistry professor at Columbia University. Amelia felt a surge of triumph. "There," she said, pointing at Sharma's file on the large screen in the study. "That's our link, a disgruntled academic. It makes perfect sense. She was probably passed over for a promotion and decided to lash out at the industry. They descended on Anya Sharma's life like a pack of wolves. They dug into her financials, her academic history, her personal emails. They found nothing. Sharma was respected, financially stable, and her record was spotless. When an investigator, posing as a journalist, tried to interview her about new trends in perfumery, she praised Ether's innovation, but claimed to have no knowledge of its founder. She was a dead end. The next trail was even more tantalizing. By analyzing Ether's shipping logistics, they discovered that a significant portion of their rare, synthetic compounds were sourced through a specialty chemical supplier in Antwerp. And that supplier's biggest client was a small boutique perfumery based in Grasse, France, the historical heart of the perfume world. The company was called Le Corbeau Parfums, the Crow Perfumes. "This is it," Amelia declared to her team. "Eon is a European, probably a classically trained nose from Grasse, who decided to go rogue. That's why no one in the American market knows him." This was the trap Elara had so carefully laid. Years ago, anticipating this very investigation, she had used a portion of her initial profits to purchase the defunct, bankrupt shell company of Le Corbeau Parfums. She'd hired a local French lawyer to maintain the paperwork and had routed a few meaningless digital inquiries through its dormant servers. It was the perfect red herring. Amelia flew to France on the family's private jet, confident she was closing in on her prey. She spent 2 weeks and a small fortune in Grasse. Her investigators bribed local officials and snooped around the old perfumeries. They found the address for Le Corbeau Parfums. It was a dusty, shuttered shop on a forgotten side street. The neighbors said it had been closed for a decade. The original owner, a man named Antoine Dubois, had retired to a quiet life in the countryside years ago. Amelia, refusing to accept defeat, tracked Dubois down. She found him in a small cottage, tending his lavender garden. He was a kindly old man in his 80s, with no idea what she was talking about. He confirmed he'd sold his defunct company's name years ago to a holding corporation he'd never dealt with directly. He hadn't made a drop of perfume in 15 years. She returned to New York empty-handed, humiliated, and furious. She had been played. The trail to France wasn't just a dead end. It was a deliberate, elegantly crafted misdirection. The cost of the futile investigation was staggering, but the blow to her ego was worse. Back in the war room, she stared at the board, which was covered in arrows, leading to dead ends. Sharma, the French ghost company. Every lead had been a phantom. "They're toying with us," she whispered, a chill running down her spine. This wasn't a random competitor. Ian knew their methods. They anticipated their every move. The precision of the misdirection. The sheer intelligence behind the corporate architecture. It was personal. "Forget the suppliers and the shell companies," she commanded her lead investigator. "Go back to the beginning. The very beginning. The first blog posts, the first reviews. Find the first person who ever wrote about ether. There has to be a patient zero. Find them." She felt a gnawing certainty that she was not hunting a stranger. She was fighting a shadow, a ghost from her own world. Someone who knew the Vances, knew how they thought, and was using that knowledge against them with breathtaking skill. The game had changed. It was no longer just an investigation. It was a reckoning. Partin, the gardener's debt. While Amelia was chasing ghosts in Europe, Elara was solidifying her power in New York. Ether was no longer just a brand. It was a movement. She had moved her operations to a larger state-of-the-art lab in the Brooklyn Navy Yard and had hired a small dedicated team who believed in Eon's vision. Yet, despite her success, a quiet unease settled over her. The final act of her plan was approaching, and it required more than just revealing her identity. It required a confrontation, and for that, she knew her story alone might not be enough. The world loved a mystery, but it also loved a scandal, and she knew her family would paint her as a vindictive, unstable liar. It was on a rainy Tuesday afternoon that a package arrived at her lab. It was a small, brown paper-wrapped box covered in stamps from a small town in rural Vermont. The return address listed no name, only a post office box. Her heart skipped a beat when she recognized the spidery handwriting. It was from Thomas, the old gardener. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside, nestled in yellowed tissue paper, were two items: a worn, leather-bound diary and a small, outdated microcassette recorder. A note, written in that same shaky hand, was tucked into the diary's cover. "My dearest Elara, if you are reading this, it means my time has come. I have followed your career from afar, my child. The whole world is talking about ether, but I just smile because I know the secret of the starling who flew away. I'm so proud of the woman you have become. I am leaving you these items not to stir up old pain, but because I believe the truth has a right to see the sun. I was a silent witness for too many years, and my silence was its own kind of betrayal. Your mother, may she rest in peace. She knew something was wrong. She argued with him about you. This old diary holds some of what I saw, but the tape holds what I heard. He never knew I was in the greenhouse that day, fixing a pane of glass. Forgive an old man for his cowardice. May this give you not vengeance, but peace. Yours always, Thomas. Tears blurred Elara's vision. She opened the diary. For hours she sat and read Thomas's entries, spanning 2 decades. He wrote about a young Amelia being coached by her father on how to describe scents, while a small, quiet Elara was shooed away. He described the tests in painstaking detail, the fake results, the praise lavished on Amelia, the pitying looks thrown at Elara. He wrote about her mother, a vibrant woman slowly crushed by the oppressive atmosphere of the Vance manor, who always seemed to be watching Elara with a worried sadness in her eyes. It was the validation of 1,000 painful, half-forgotten memories. Then, with a deep breath, she picked up the microcassette player. It was an old, cheap model. She pressed the play button. After a moment of static, she heard voices. Voices she knew better than her own. It was her father, Richard, and her mother, Eleanor. The recording was tinny, distorted by the greenhouse glass, but the words were horribly clear. Eleanor's voice, strained and pleading. "Richard, you cannot keep doing this to her. She's just a child. You're breaking her spirit." Richard's voice, cold and resolute. "I am protecting her, and I am protecting this family. The Vance legacy is built on perfection. Her deficiency is a crack in the foundation. If we acknowledge it, we legitimize it. We weaken ourselves." Eleanor. "Deficiency? What if you're wrong? What if the doctors were wrong?" Richard, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "The doctors said what I paid them to say. It is better for her to believe she is broken than for the world to believe we are. She will live a comfortable life, away from the pressures of our world. Amelia has the gift. Amelia will carry our name forward. It is a kindness, Eleanor. A cruel kindness, perhaps, but a necessary one. She will never know the truth." The tape clicked off, followed by a long hiss of static. Elara sat in the silence of her lab, the small plastic recorder feeling as heavy as a gravestone in her hands. She listened to it again and then a third time. This was it. The smoking gun. The irrefutable, ugly truth spoken in her father's own voice. Her plan for revenge had always been poetic, architectural and intellectual. She would dismantle their legacy with her own genius. But this was different. This was not about poetry. This was about justice. Thomas's final gift hadn't just given her proof. It had given her a shield and a sword. It had extinguished the last flickering ember of doubt in her heart. Her father hadn't been misguided. He had been malicious. Her sister hadn't just been a rival. She had been a co-conspirator. She was no longer just a competitor seeking to best her family. She was a daughter about to expose a crime committed against a child. The final confrontation at the upcoming Fragrance Foundation Awards would no longer be a simple revelation. It would be a trial. And she, at last, was ready to be the prosecutor. Parte de. The fateful gala, the Fragrance Foundation Awards Gala, was the Oscars of the perfume world. A glittering spectacle of glamour, money, and power held in the grand ballroom of a historic New York hotel. The air was thick with 1,000 competing scents and the palpable hum of ambition. This year, 2 names dominated the conversation: Vance and Ether. The Vances were there to receive the Lifetime Achievement Award, a prize Amelia had lobbied for aggressively. It was a desperate PR move to project an image of enduring strength, a golden crown for a crumbling empire. Richard and Amelia sat at the head table, accepting congratulations with strained, regal smiles. Richard looked older, the lines on his face deeper, while Amelia's eyes, sharp as broken glass, scanned the crowd. A predator still searching for the mysterious Eon who had haunted her for months. The buzz in the room, however, was not for them. It was for Ether. Nostalgia was the frontrunner for Perfume of the Year, the night's most prestigious honor. Its success was unprecedented, its creator a complete enigma. People whispered at their tables, speculating on who Eon could be. A European recluse? A collective of rebel chemists? No one knew, and the mystery only fueled the hype. Elara was there, seated at a discreet table near the back, with Professor Sharma. She was unrecognizable. Gone was the pale, ghostly girl from the Vance Manor. In her place was a poised, confident woman, in a simple, elegant black gown, her hair swept up, her face illuminated by a quiet, steely resolve. No one gave her a second glance. She was just another face in the crowd. The ceremony dragged on. Awards were given for packaging, for marketing, for men's fragrance. When the moment came for the Vance family's award, a lavish video montage played, showcasing their history, their gardens, their legacy of perfection. Richard delivered a self-important speech about tradition and integrity. His hypocrisy, so thick, it was almost suffocating. Elara watched, her heart beating a slow, steady rhythm, the microcassette recorder feeling small and dense in her evening bag. Finally, the moment arrived. The presenter, a famous actress, stepped up to the microphone to announce the final award. "And now," she said, her voice echoing through the silent ballroom, "the award for the 2025 Perfume of the Year. An award for a fragrance that didn't just capture the market, but captured our imaginations. A scent that redefined what perfume could be." The screen behind her showed the 5 nominees. 4 were from major established houses. The 5th was Ether's Nostalgia, its minimalist vial looking stark and modern against the others' ornate bottles. Amelia held her breath, a faint sneer on her lips. She was certain one of the establishment brands would win, that the industry would ultimately choose tradition over this new age gimmickry. "And the winner is," the actress said, opening the envelope. She smiled, a look of genuine delight on her face. "Ether for Nostalgia." The ballroom erupted in applause. It was a shocking, exhilarating win for the underdog. The applause was thunderous, a genuine outpouring of admiration for the year's most talked-about creation. After a moment, the presenter leaned back to the microphone. "We invite the founder of Ether, the brilliant and mysterious Eon, to the stage to accept the award." The applause continued, but now it was mixed with a palpable sense of anticipation. All eyes scanned the room. Who would stand up? From which table would the ghost emerge? The spotlight swept across the crowd. Searching, Richard and Amelia watched, their faces frozen masks of disbelief and fury. Their Lifetime Achievement Award had been utterly eclipsed, and at the back of the room, Elara Vance took a sip of water, placed her napkin on the table, and pushed back her chair. Professor Sharma gave her hand a squeeze, a look of fierce pride in her eyes. Slowly, deliberately, Elara began to walk toward the stage. She didn't hurry. Each step was measured, confident. As she moved from the shadows of the back tables into the full glare of the gala lights, a few heads began to turn. A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. Who was this unknown woman? The spotlight operator? guided by her determined walk, finally found her and bathed her in its white-hot glow. At the front table, Amelia squinted, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. The face was familiar, but it was impossible. It was the face of her sister, the girl with no scent, the family's broken, forgotten secret. But this woman was not broken. She was radiant, powerful, and she was walking toward the stage to accept the industry's highest honor for a masterpiece of scent. Richard's wineglass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the floor as Elara Vance, his discarded daughter, ascended the stairs to claim her victory. Part tulas, the scent of justice. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. A thick, heavy blanket of disbelief. Every eye was fixed on the woman on stage, this impossible apparition. For Richard and Amelia Vance, the world had stopped turning. They could only stare, their faces pale with shock, as Elara reached the podium and gracefully accepted the heavy, star-shaped award. She stood for a moment, letting the silence stretch, her calm gaze sweeping over the sea of faces, until it rested briefly on her family. She did not look angry. She did not look triumphant. She looked free. "Thank you," she said, her voice clear and steady, amplified throughout the hall. It was a voice no one in that room, save two people, had ever heard before. "On behalf of everyone at Ether, I am deeply honored." She paused, then gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I know many of you are wondering who I am. My professional name is Eon, but for most of my life, I have been known by another name." She looked directly at her father. "For those of you who do not know me, my name is Elara Vance." A collective gasp went through the audience. 1,000 whispers erupted. Vance? The broken daughter? The family's hidden shame? It was a plot twist more shocking than any Perfume launch. "My family, the Vances," she continued, her voice unwavering, "are known for their gift. A legendary sense of smell, passed down through generations. A gift I was told I did not receive. I grew up believing I was flawed, that I lived in a silent world, unable to perceive the beauty that was my family's birthright." She held up the award. "This award, for a creation of scent, would suggest otherwise. The truth is, my perception isn't flawed. It's just different. I was inspired to create Nostalgia to explore a scientific question. How does our unique genetic makeup define our reality? The central molecule in Nostalgia is a reflection of that question. To most of the world, it is beautiful. But to those with a specific genetic anomaly, a very specific olfactory gene, it is unpleasant." She didn't need to say more. She had just, in calm scientific terms, dismantled their entire legacy. She had reframed their gift as a genetic anomaly, a limitation. She had exposed them as the ones who were flawed, who were blind to the beauty the rest of the world could see. Amelia's face was a mask of pure hatred. Richard seemed to have aged 20 years in 20 seconds. "I built Ether to prove that my worth was not determined by my inheritance," Elara said, her voice softening slightly. "But I know that some may see this as a simple family dispute, a story of jealousy or revenge. They may paint me as a liar." She reached into her evening bag and took out the small microcassette recorder. "So, I don't ask you to take my word for it." She held the recorder up to the microphone. "This is a recording of my father, Richard Vance, from many years ago, explaining his methods." She pressed play. The tinny, distorted voice of Richard Vance filled the cavernous, silent hall. The doctors said what I paid them to say. It is better for her to believe she is broken than for the world to believe we are. It is a kindness, Eleanor. A cruel kindness, perhaps, but a necessary one. She will never know the truth. The hiss of the blank tape that followed was the loudest sound Elara had ever heard. It was the sound of a dynasty crumbling to dust, of a myth being executed in public. The faces of the audience had turned from shock to horror, and now to contempt as they looked at the Vances. Elara switched off the recorder. She looked out at the crowd, her expression one of sad, final resolution. He was wrong, she said quietly. The truth always finds a way to the light. She did not say another word. She didn't need to. She placed the award on the podium, turned, and walked off the stage, leaving the wreckage of her family's name behind her. She didn't look at them. She didn't look back at all. As she walked through the now parting crowd, past the stunned faces and clicking cameras, she felt the last chain break. Her victory wasn't the look of horror on her father's face, or the public humiliation of her sister. It wasn't even the award in her hand. Her victory was this moment, walking away, whole and self-defined, into a future she had built, molecule by molecule, a future that smelled of nothing but her own choosing. Justice, she realized, was the sweetest scent of all.